my view is that Zelensky and European leaders know that Putin is not really serious about creating a peace deal. They know that he wants more land in Ukraine and he feels very empowered at the moment. And therefore, kind of what their critical diplomatic mission is to do is to actually make sure that when eventually peace negotiations fall apart, that Trump has the view that actually this is due to Putin's failure and actually not due to Ukraine's. And hopefully that results in more favorable policy towards Ukraine after those negotiations break down. And, to my mind, the best way of doing that is actually to convince Trump that Putin is humiliating him. We know that Trump is ultimately a very insecure individual, and that's the last thing he wants to be doing. And of course, that's what we saw in Alaska. I can't recall a time in modern history where American weakness has been more nakedly and deliberately paraded in front of the entire world in the way that it was in Alaska. So I think ultimately Europeans have a very critical role here in supporting Ukraine.
But here's the question, Adam. What ends the war?
Well, to my mind, anyone who has ever sat opposite Russia negotiating table and concluded a deal will know that regardless of what Russia agrees to, they ultimately keep breaking deals. And we've seen that specifically with Ukraine. They broke the Budapest Memorandum in 1994 that, recognized Ukraine's territorial integrity. They broke the Minsk agreements about 10 years ago on Ukraine. And they've also broken all of the ceasefire agreements that have been concluded over the last few years on just the brief pauses in fighting. So ultimately, we cannot trust the words of Vladimir Putin, and Ukraine knows that, and the rest of Europe knows that. And so really those kind of guarantees, the security guarantees that the West is looking for, and Ukraine is looking for, really have to be more than words. And really what they mean by that is actually we need boots on the ground, because we can't have some kind of sort of NATO light approach where, there's kind of loose security guarantees for Ukraine if Russia tries to invade again, because ultimately we know that those aren't strong enough to deter Putin. We will need thousands of Western troops along Ukraine's eastern lines to ensure that actually Vladimir Putin knows that if he continues to attack Ukraine after an agreement, that actually he will be facing the full West and not just Ukrainian armed forces. So ultimately, Vladimir Putin only respects one thing, and that is Western warfighting capabilities. And that is something that, the West really needs to show it is willing to engage with in trying to form a deal. And I think ultimately until Putin is sort of coerced and forced into creating a deal, both economically and militarily, we're not going to see a conclusion to this horrific war.